The 80s and 90s in cinema were really defined by Steven Spielberg. He's a man known for having had a hand in many of the time's greatest films, including Raiders of the Lost Ark, Schindler's List, as well and Saving Private Ryan, as well as many others. Spielberg was a master of great film directing and still is. But his greatest production and my favorite was a small movie that you might have heard of called Jurassic Park. Based on Michael Crichton's novel, the same name, which is a great read, by the way. The film was groundbreaking for its time. It's probably the most important dinosaur-based movie ever released, with the exception of Land Before Time. It was a pioneer in CGI, which could be considered a good or bad thing considering what came after it. And raked in over $1 billion at the box office. Of course, with success comes a drive for more sequels, and Universal was hungry for more. As it turned out, so were the fans, and in '97 and 2001, we got sequels to the beloved original. The first of these two films, The Lost World, though somewhat dividing among fans, was generally well received, and even today isn't looked at as being too bad. And while I won't look at that film specifically today, I probably will talk about it sometime down the road, maybe a couple years from now on the film's 30th anniversary in 2027. But anywho, there actually was a third film released in the franchise, Jurassic Park 3, released in July of 2001. This was a fact that was quite surprising to me, actually, as I had known about The Lost World for a good number of years, but had never even heard of this one until recently when I was surfing around the internet. I was shocked to see that there was even a third film in the original series before the Jurassic World movies, and figured, what the heck, why not give it a watch? After all, I might as well complete the series since I've never seen it. It actually ended up being pretty good, and I kinda like it. Despite some of the problems, it did have a certain small studio vibe you don't get from big name studios, and I kinda dig that. Come to find out, most people online actually really hate this movie, and I don't really understand this. So, after some thinking, I decided, since there's a new Jurassic World film coming out this July with Jurassic World Rebirth, and the return of the Spinosaurus in that film, of which Jurassic Park 3 features it as its main villain, I might as well talk about this film. And if I'm being honest, I kind of have a soft spot for this film since I first saw it. So, I figured, why don't I step up to the plate for it? Besides, I've been meaning to look at some movies on this channel, so why not talk about this film for our first review? So today, I'll be looking at a film that is known more in name than in content, Jurassic Park 3. You know, thinking back to the 2000s, it's honestly an odd time for movies if we're being real. Most studios were kind of floundering in a sense. It's really a time when many of these companies were still getting a footing with CGI, and a lot of straight to home movies were still kind of big. And I really should know because I watched a decent amount of these films. And really, the point of all of this is that this is the kind of environment in which a film such as Jurassic Park 3 was able to be released in. And I say this because Jurassic Park 3 feels like a direct-to-video film, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, despite what people would tell you online. Overall, the film has a pretty campy vibe. It's weird to think that despite this film getting a lot of flack over the years for its campy vibe, as well as other factors, it actually turned a pretty good profit for the time, making about $368 million on a budget of just $93 million, which was a lot for the time, but is a pretty good profit margin if you're just doing pure numbers. But the movie itself is a whole different story, so let's talk about the plot. This film's plot is pretty basic, all things considered. Essentially, A family named the Kirbys let their son Eric go paragliding or whatever this sport is called. Forgive me, I'm not super familiar with the activity he's doing. Anyways, dinosaurs end up attacking the boat that they are attached to, and they end up getting stuck on Isla Sorna, the same island from the previous film Lost World, if you've ever seen that film. During all of this, Dr. Grant is still researching and digging up fossils, and really going about his life as it was before the events of the original Jurassic Park. And it's nice to see that he held up. Though, really, the incident at Jurassic Park seems to be all anyone wants to talk about.
Does anyone have a question?
Fine. Does anyone have a question that does not relate to Jurassic Park?
We get a cool little scene where they 3D print a Velociraptor larynx, which comes in handy later, and to be honest, doesn't really make any sense because as far as I was concerned, we knew really jack all about what dinosaurs really sounded like, but honestly, what do I know? Maybe they found a super complete Velociraptor skeleton or something like that, mummified like they did that ankylosaur, or was it a nodosaur? I don't remember what kind. But, that nodosaur, I believe it was, up in Canada. Who knows? But anywho, Dr. Grant is approached by Mr. and Mrs. Kirby from before, who, like John Hammond before them, offer Grant a blank check in order to give him a tour of the island. Or at least that's what Grant thinks. After he has this really weird nightmare, which admittedly lives in my head pretty rent-free. He wakes up to see they've landed on the island, which Grant warns is a horrible idea. Despite this, Mrs. Kirby begins her campaign for being the dumbest character in a Jurassic Park movie by shouting to the trees with a megaphone trying to find her son. Why that would work, I have no idea, but who knows. All this attention attracts the movie's newest villain, a Spinosaurus, and believe me, we'll talk about this guy later. However, the gang try and fly away, only to hit at the dinosaur and crash into the jungle. And I've got to say it, if this film had been released any later than summer 2001, it probably would have undergone a lot of changes to the plane scene. I'm just saying, considering what would come after it. But anyways, after this, they're stranded on the island, and Grant tells them he really doesn't know anything about this island, though they expected him to because he had been on Isla Nublar, which are completely different islands, and they didn't know that. And essentially, the rest of the movie, they go on a 45-minute long escapade in the second act to try and find their son. Eventually, however, Grant stumbles upon the missing kid, and he finds that he's been living in a tanker truck for the past 8 weeks, which, honestly, the fact this kid survived that long on this island makes it almost feel like he should be saving the parents rather than them saving him, but whatever. The rest of the movie basically ends up being them just trying to escape the island, which they eventually do. As I said before, it's not a completely complicated story, and I don't really think it needs to be. It works for what it is. I'd say it's solidly B tier and doesn't overcomplicate things too much, but at the same time, it doesn't make the story too simple. Where it fails as a big name production, it really does succeed as a B movie. And to be honest, it really didn't have much in the way of competition in the early 2000s, which is likely why it made as much as it did. I mean, seriously, do you really think The Land Before Time 8 was really going to really destroy this film? Wait a minute. They made 8 of those? I'm going to have to look at Land Before Time at some point, aren't I? Anyways, my point is this story really isn't as bad as people say it is. So, with that in mind, let's look at some of the common complaints about this film and why they may or may not be warranted. So, now it's time to talk about anyone's favorite part of a film review, the complaints. So yeah, if you know anything about this film, you probably know there's a lot of complaints that people have whenever this movie's talked about or discussed online. So I figured, why don't we look at some of these complaints and we'll see if they're warranted or not. I've kind of divided these up into many of the more, I'd say more important ones that everyone talks about. So yeah, let's get into them. This first problem is one people usually point out about this film as a major problem, and it's one that I can't, in really all honesty, defend, and that is the opening to the film. Yeah, this movie fakes us all out, myself included, by making it seem that Dr. Grant and Sattler finally got together, only for the camera to snap to this random lawyer character. Yeah, this is a pretty poor choice. Why they decided to rip Grant and Sattler apart is beyond me. And really, the reason this is such a problem is because one of the main ideas of the original film was to show Grant's transformation from a paleontologist who really didn't care for kids to one who becomes a father like figure for Tim and Lex, helping protect them and get them out of danger during the attacks against of the dinosaurs at the original Jurassic Park. And also, the chemistry that the original film created between Sattler and Grant worked really well.
I hate computers.
Feelings mutual.
And it's worked so well, in fact, that you can still see cracks of this shine through in the characters' conversation at the beginning of this movie. This is really a pretty poor way to start the movie, and honestly, like I said earlier, the complaints are pretty understandable here. Now, this complaint is one that I was thinking about and had actually known about prior to seeing this film. Really the only thing I knew about Jurassic Park 3. The Spinosaurus is a pretty dividing character, and one of the most dividing things about it is the first fight you see it in. The Spinosaurus vs. T-Rex fight is a really dividing moment in the Jurassic Park franchise for the fan base. There are those who really enjoy the Spinosaurus as a dinosaur and love watching it destroy stuff. However, if we're getting technical, this fight really shouldn't go down the way it does. The Tyrannosaurus rex had one of, if not the strongest bites of any theropod dinosaur, with an estimate of 6 to 7 tons of bite force. He could bite clean through bone, as has been found in some fossilized remains. So this fight really should have been over the second the T-Rex bit into the Spinosaurus' neck, and should have just been over immediately. And also, the way the Spinosaurus wins this fight is pretty equally ridiculous. It grabs the T-Rex's neck and just snaps it. This would never work. The T-Rex had an incredibly strong neck, as it had a very large head, thus it would have to have an incredibly strong neck to support it. And if we're being real, combine everything that the T-Rex has versus Spinosaurus, first off, these two would have never fought each other in the wild, so I don't see why they would have fought if they were brought back as dinosaurs. But even if they did fight, the T-Rex would win this 9 times out of 10. Maybe the T-Rex gets unlucky somehow, and you see the Spinosaurus, get some sort of advantage using the terrain, something like that. I don't really know. The T-Rex would pretty much win this 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10. But, there'd be a time where the Spinosaurus could win. But it shouldn't be as easy as it is. Yeah, that was brought to you by, your neighborhood dinosaur nerd. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that I like dinosaurs, considering my channel's name. But even though the T-Rex's death is pretty infamous, the Spinosaurus is still a pretty cool antagonist. Most hated it when it was shown, but I don't think it's the character itself that's to blame. Sure, they could have handled the swapping of antagonists for the movie a little better, but otherwise, I think it's actually pretty refreshing to see an antagonist in the Jurassic Park film be anything other than a T-Rex or a raptor, though they still are raptors in the film. And especially considering the second movie only changed the number of T-Rexes and that the first movie had T-Rexes, it's pretty interesting to see some variety. To be honest, I really don't hate the Spinosaurus. I actually think it's pretty decently cool, though the fight between it and the T-Rex, like I said, just doesn't make any sense and should have never gone down the way it did. Now, like I said earlier, one thing you always see about this film is that it is usually regarded as a B-movie. Though it was a major production and actually the 8th highest grossing film in its year, it does have a pretty small production feel. All I can say is that if you're expecting a blockbuster feel from this movie, then you're going to be disappointed. This is the kind of movie that you put on a Friday night in the winter at some other point when you have downtime and just watch for the heck of it. And really, it's a film that you watch just because you've seen the others, or at least that's why I did. Having a campy feel doesn't necessarily make a movie bad, and it honestly works pretty great for this movie. It's nice and short. It's short and sweet. It's the first of the films to be about an hour and a half long, considering the previous two were over 2 hours long. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes shorter is better, and really, you can't really complain about it that much. There's plenty of campy movies in the past that have been pretty great. I mean, there's a ton of classics that are campy. So yeah, I don't think this is a bad thing for the film, you know? And so yeah, I don't think this is bad. People usually complain about this, but they really shouldn't. So yeah, now it's time for the fun part, or the fun part for me, I should say, which are my thoughts on it. And overall, I don't think this is a bad film. Most look down on this as being the beginning to the end for the franchise, and really being what would snowball into the Jurassic World movies. Though those movies can have a terrible reputation that I don't think they deserve, but we'll talk about those movies someday. Um, but yeah, the film was quite campy. Like I said earlier, this is usually complained about. Many scenes are over exaggerated to make them feel more serious than they are. I don't think these are bad things, and I think it's actually a great example of a film just being entertainment for entertainment's sake. I think the problem with reviewers these days that I see, and a lot of your mainstream reviewers, is everything is looked at as though it needs to be a new form of art, and that it needs to be the next Picasso of movies. And you're just not going to get that. I mean, yeah, sure, you have a film like, say, The Lion King or I should say, Empire Strikes Back. Those are films that are basically really could be considered pieces of art, with how well they're designed. But not every film needs to be that way. There are films that can just be entertainment for the sake of entertainment. And that's exactly what Jurassic Park 3 is. It's just fun to watch. It's just an entertaining movie. It's like the Michael Bay Transformers. You don't have to really get super deep into the plot, but it's just cool to watch robots fight each other the same way it is to watch people. I watch a Grant and all these random characters run away from dinosaurs. It's just fun. Yeah. Speaking of design and all of that, and how the film is set up, the dinosaurs design in this film I actually think are pretty subpar, to be real. I mean, let's be honest. These dinosaurs have a lot of inaccuracies if you're kind of a dinosaur nerd like I am. But some of the designs, though, ignoring the fact that some of them are pretty inaccurate, when they do hit it out of the park. The Spinosaurus is actually a great example of this. It looks pretty cool. Sure, its fight with the T-Rex doesn't make sense, and obviously, if you know anything about the Spinosaurus, this thing is pretty much not anywhere. It's pretty much nowhere close to what the Spinosaurus would have actually looked like. But I don't think that sours this thing's design. There are some pretty goofy scenes for it, though. It acts pretty weird. There's also raptors in the film. Like I said previously, they're back. And they are pretty menacing. They use pretty clever tricks to hide from Grant, hiding behind glass and all that. And yeah, I thought the dinosaurs in general had pretty good designs, but also, I don't know. I could see where someone wouldn't like their designs. But overall, I think they're pretty good. Like I also said, the story isn't bad, and compared to most pieces of media that try and shoehorn Dr. Grant in, like all the video games they've made, for example, Jurassic Park 2, The Chaos Continues on SNES, just made him a full-on mercenary. But I think this movie does it in a way that actually makes a good amount of sense. And yeah, like I said earlier, Grant just finds himself in the island because of a trick, which makes decent sense. I mean, sure, he's a smart guy, but this could happen to anybody. And funny enough, Grant actually ends up being the only person in this movie that has any amount of sense. I mean, seriously, this movie's characters, aside from Grant, pretty much have the combined IQ of a folding chair. The wife character is pretty much the worst offender. I said earlier that her screaming at the trees with her megaphone is pretty much set her up to be one of the most annoying characters that ever existed. She's almost as bad as Claire in the first Jurassic World. Yeah, she's a pretty bad character. I don't like her. And she's pretty much the entire reason that the Spinosaurus even shows itself and starts chasing them. Who knows? Maybe that Spinosaurus just dislikes her as much as I dislike her as a character. But yeah. On the visual side of things, I think the film looks great. I really don't have any complaints. I would say that it brings over that darker visual style that The Lost World had. Everything was rainy in that film and dark, for the most part. But I don't think it's kind of this way in Jurassic Park 3. I don't think it's a bad thing, but it definitely could be considered a bad thing. So there's that. Some of the scenes, though, are especially pretty good, such as the scene where everyone's in the aviary with the pteranodons. The only problem that I found is that some of these dinosaurs' appearances are kind of like messed up in terms of like tone. In this scene, for example, with these poor sauropods, they just look awful. They're like creepy as all get out. And to be honest, some of the carnivores aren't even that scary. I mean, compared to these poor long necks, I mean, they're really creepy compared to the Spinosaurus. Yeah, it's just weird. First of all, the T-Rex too, when it first appears, it looks pretty cute and harmless. And it's a T-Rex. It shouldn't be that way. And I gotta be honest, even if for those that hate the Lost World, you can still admit that they made the herbivorous dinosaurs look about as threatening as they should look, which is not at all. Either way, the visuals are still good though, aside from those problems that I did list. So overall, I think this is a better movie than most people give it credit for. It's not a masterpiece or a game changer in cinema, but it is a solidly B-tier movie that is fun to watch if you got some time to kill. And compared to the last two Jurassic World movies that we got, it's pretty good. I mean, from a narrative standpoint, it's way better than those films. I'd give it a solid 76% out of 100. Not the best film of all time, but pretty solid. As I think many of the complaints raged against it simply fall flat, as I said before. 2 out of the 3 major complaints really don't make any sense. As well as the fact that it creates a decently competent story and has some decent tension. I would recommend this film. It gets the Jake-rassic stamp of approval. And especially if you've seen the other films, it's a great way to wrap them up, It's a great way to wrap up the original trilogy of Jurassic Park films. Even though the ending's a little wonky, I will say that, it's still a great movie. It's very fun to watch. It's very great. Like I said, I'd give it a 76% out of 10 on my ratings. So yeah, that's what I'd really rate it.